Everybody joining me on today's show is a longtime visitor, guest of all the many podcasts I've done over the years, and that is Bill Bender, national college football writer for the Sporting News. You can check him out on the CFB Nation podcast as well. And Bill, as always, I appreciate the time.
Hey, Phillip. Good to talk to you, man. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, yeah, glad to have you on. Glad to have you on talk all things college football. It's been an interesting season so far. We're 4 weeks in. Just, this is kind of like a grand scope, a large canvas of things to ask you. But what's been your initial thoughts on the season? What's really been sticking out to you?
No, we've had great games. I mean, obviously Deion has taken up a lot of the oxygen, and not him. I mean, just the Colorado story has over the first month of the season. I think that's been huge. There's been some great games. 3 great games really set the tone for the month. LSU, Florida State, Alabama, Texas, and Ohio State, Notre Dame. And I think each one got a little bit better as we went along. And we had talked about those in the summer, and the fact that all 3 games not only lived up to expectations, but have kind of shaped the playoff picture from there. Pretty cool to see.
Yeah, I think the cool thing with the Deion part of it with Colorado is it's brought college football in front of eyeballs that may have hadn't been watching before. Maybe they're just pro football fans, but they know what Deion Sanders was and just his personality, very charismatic and bringing more eyeballs. And we've seen it with the TV ratings with the Colorado State game. In the past that you wouldn't have seen that many people watch that game. So I think that's obviously a positive for college football, that what he's bringing to the sport.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it brought some casuals. It brought another. It's put Deion in front of another generation of fans. I mean, I was been telling radio stations for the past 2 weeks. I took my son and one of his buddies, Weston, to football practice the other night, and I'm telling them about Deion, and I was explaining him as the player. As I was like, well, just picture the fastest guy on the field that's the best defensive player, and in the summertime when he's supposed to be training, he's out playing Major League Baseball and stealing 40 bases. It was and now we're seeing that phenomenon as a coach. I think he's been great for the sport. I think it's driven some interest. It's created some side effects, which we can get into, like the coaches that are talking more smack than usual. But I don't think that's Deion's fault. I think he's always carried himself as a supremely confident person. Nothing's changed on that regard.
Yeah, Tom was a player. I remember watching him play too. It was basically when he was in his prime, you did not throw to his side of the field unless you wanted to get intercepted. He could very well take it all the way back. And with that, too, yeah, it's been interesting with coaches, stuff they have said. And I remember going into the Colorado State game. I was talking to some buddies, Bill, and I saw what Jay Norvell said. I thought, oh, no, you didn't. That just added to the game, which, it was a great game, double overtime. And then we saw what Dan Lanning said, the pregame, had the cameras there in the locker room. What's been your take on the coaches with the trash talk back toward him?
Well, so Dan Lanning, Norvell was one where, yeah, Deion was going to take that and run with it because it wasn't just it was a personal shot. I think what Dan Lanning said, I would have said everything that he said in front of my team, no doubt, to get them going before a game. But I probably would have kept the cameras off. But that's the world we're living in. Like I said, it's a side effect. I mean, last weekend, whether it was Dan Lanning or Ryan Day after the Notre Dame game or Jake Dickert, who took some Lee Corso comments out of context, that these coaches are airing it out. They're taking it personal. That's become trendy. I don't know if that's a good thing long term, because I always say, if you're going to talk trash and bring those kind of things up and act like that when you win, you better be ready to be criticized even more when you lose. And that's some people may say that's an old man, like, get off my lawn type way, but that's my right to have that outlook as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Oh, and just looking at the game you were at Saturday night, the Ohio State Notre Dame game, just the atmosphere. We had some former coach, Hall of Fame coach Lou Holtz and Ryan Day chirping too in that one. It's a good transition into this one. But overall, the game, very physical football game, 17-14 win from Ohio State. Just the atmosphere and just your overall takes on being there on Saturday night.
Yeah, it was fun. It was awesome. It was a great scene. It was, Notre Dame obviously was one play away from the biggest program win in 30 years, and that stadium was ready to erupt, but Ohio State kind of stole the game. And they earned it. It's not like they did anything cheap, but then the story, instead of Kyle McCord leading this drive or the defense looking really good against Sam Hartman or Chip Trainum with Ryan Day's gutsy call, it all became Ryan Day and Lou Holtz. And that took a little bit away from the game, I think, because the story became Ryan Day going after Lou Holtz and everything else, which, I mean, there's so many critics on these talk shows anymore that imagine if Nick Saban went after everybody that's criticized him over since 2007, it'd be a pretty long list.
That would have been a long list the week before the Ole Miss game.
Right. And he answered that. So I like I said, I mean, the thing that Lou Holtz did though, and I have less of a problem with what Ryan Day said, is he called him by name. So like whenever somebody criticizes you by name, it's your right to respond. And he did, and it's created a lot of things. I think the story's blown out of control because we're on like day 4 watch of what will Ryan Day say back to Lou Holtz, which we'll probably have to wait till next week because Ohio State is on a bye week this week.
And let's talk about quarterback Kyle McCord. He was 21 of 37, 240. Had the big pass to get them down to the 1-yard line before they eventually did score and win the game. Just what's been your take on him in that game and just this season, of course, replacing C.J. Stroud?
I mean, gutty performance because it got them down to the goal line and made the necessary plays when they needed them. And obviously that was huge. So I thought played well in the clutch. It wasn't always pretty. It isn't always pretty with Kyle McCord. And, but I've told people, so all these first-round quarterbacks from Ohio State, well, the last 3 Ohio State quarterbacks to win a national championship are Craig Krenzel, Rex Kern in 1968, Craig Krenzel in 2002, and Cardale Jones, who replaced J.T. Barrett, neither of whom really played in the NFL for that long. So it doesn't have to be glamorous. And for Kyle McCord, it was a big win on the road in his first top 10 start on the road, and got the job done. So that's what it comes down to. 4th down throw was huge. Throw to Emeka Buka was huge. He made the throws in crunch time and on 3rd down, and that's what matters.
Yeah, and how about Notre Dame? With them, Sam Hartman. I mean, it feels like a different team with this Notre Dame team, and that would have been huge. You mentioned how long it's been since they've had a win that big for Notre Dame. Probably would have been perception changing for them. But you look at them the rest of the year with Sam Hartman, the quarterback. Where do you see them?
And they got to take care of business this week. It's a pretty good Duke team with Riley Leonard that they're facing, and so there's no time. What happened last year? They lose to Marshall and. They're out of the playoff race in 2 weeks. It would not be good for them to be knocked out of the playoff race on September 30th in Marcus Freeman's second season, given how high and where this program kind of stood. So, yeah, I mean, this is a huge game, and Duke comes in with a ton of momentum. Mike Elko's done a fantastic job there in the last 2 seasons, and there's a lot on the line. So it'll be interesting to see how Notre Dame comes out. Do they take care of another ACC team like they normally do, or do they struggle, have a hangover, and allow that little window for an upset, which would be the biggest month in Duke history if they could beat Clemson and Notre Dame in the same month?
Yeah, they may officially call themselves a football school if that happens over a basketball school if that happens on that one. Alabama, and we kind of mentioned them a little bit, winning 24-10 over Ole Miss, and of course, and I'm down here. It was all doom and gloom after the Texas game, and then the way they looked against South Florida. A lot of Alabama fans were worried, but they looked like Alabama to a degree. Defense and running the ball. But what's been your take on Alabama so far this season?
The quarterback thing is withstanding, but the defense was the story last week. When you get 5 sacks and 10 tackles for loss, and everybody just wants to pile the dirt on Alabama. They want them to be done because it's fashionable and they want this dynasty over with, and they're not really a dynasty at this point. I mean, the dynasty's happened, but they're still a competitive team. I think they could still compete and win for the SEC West and get to Atlanta and get a shot at Georgia. I think, the Texas game exposed some ills from last season that have carried over, and Bryce Young was able to cure that. Now, whether Jalen Milroe can do the same over the next couple months remains to be seen. But they did have an impressive win last week. I think they'll win this weekend. And then from there, they win at Texas A&M. The tough ones will be at home, LSU and Tennessee. Those will be the next two kind of defining games for Nick Saban, and whether or not he can, I think they're fully capable of going 11-1, but I just think LSU is a little bit better team right now.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about that with LSU and Alabama. Is that still the two teams there in the West in your mind?
Yeah, and obviously LSU plays at Ole Miss this weekend, and that viewpoint could change because LSU was the other team that had second out meltdown against Florida State. Didn't look great against Arkansas last weekend, but survived and got the win. And here we go. They get into the Ole Miss game, and I still think they're the team most likely to beat a Georgia. Now, whether or not they do it, I don't know. But I think with Jaden Daniels, the talent around him, Malik Neighbors, that defense, that they would be the best positioned team to give Georgia a run in that SEC championship environment if it happens.
Yeah, it's been quite interesting with the SEC because the first couple of weeks, the record against other Power 5 wasn't great. What's been your viewpoint on the SEC so far? Do you think this is a down year for the SEC? 'Cause that's been out there by some people.
Well, there's no other conclusion you can draw. When you lose so far, that doesn't mean it has to be like that all year. But when Florida State gets beat by LSU and Texas A&M gets beat by Miami and Alabama gets beat by Texas, those are the most visible games the conference has had, and they've lost. Unless you're hanging your hat on a non-conference win like Missouri beating Kansas State, which was a nice win for the Tigers, but that's not one that's going to get a lot of glamour. But all that said, it won't matter if Georgia holds up the trophy. So, as we get into the one thing the SEC should pay attention to, though, and might be more of a long-term concern, if you look at the top 10 right now, 3 Big Ten teams, all very good. 3 teams coming to the Big Ten in Washington, Oregon, and USC. So, that's an interesting stat to me.
Yeah, how bad is it? The Pac-12, their final year basically of playing, and they're probably having one of their best years. They have a great group of teams there with USC, Oregon. They've had the storylines with, Colorado, which of course they're going to the Big 12. It's just it's funny and kind of not funny at the same time.
Yeah, it's sad because had this conference just held up for one more year, we would have a lot more Big 12 football and football, and quarterback play has been phenomenal. Mm-hmm. Cameron Ward is like 4th in passer rating in the conference, and he's been phenomenal. So I think that's something to keep in mind. There's going to be a lot of good Pac-12 games in October and November, starting with Washington and Oregon on October 7th. That's going to be an absolutely great game. This weekend, Colorado USC. Shedeur and Caleb Williams on the same field. That's going to attract a lot of attention. So it is sad that they won't have a conference next year, but at the same time, you can enjoy what they have this year. It's going to be really fun to watch this play out.
Yeah, it is. And, and finally, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the Florida State Seminoles. Of course, we talked about them when I had you on when we talked in the offseason. Those 2 big games against LSU and Clemson. Well, they went 2-0. They're 4-0. I know Mike Norvell said on Tuesday that we're 4-0, but we haven't had a complete game or played our best game yet. And, Bill, you kind of look ahead at their schedule. They have Duke coming to Tallahassee on October 21st, and then later on they'll have a home game in November against Miami. But when you look at this team, I wouldn't say they have a easy path to the ACC to be undefeated, but they're on a good track. Just what are your thoughts on Florida State going to the bye week and the rest of their season?
They'll have those tests down the road, but at least they're at home. Duke, home game. Like you said, the other North Carolina home, and then at the end of the year at Florida. Or Miami at home. And then the end of the year at Florida, they passed the test. No other team had 2 big wins like that in September. So, they're definitely a team worth watching. I think you could lightly pencil them in, but there's a long way to go in the ACC. There's still a lot of competitive teams in that conference.
Yeah, before I let you go on the ACC, when you look at Clemson with 2 losses. I mean, it's not impossible for them to get back to the ACC championship game, but it's an uphill climb, and then especially with no divisions in the ACC. So when you look at who do you see as that number 2 team?
Hard to say. I mean, probably Clemson, and maybe it's Duke, maybe it's North Carolina looks real sharp so far because they have a defense on top of and a running game to support Drake May, who has thrown a couple picks but is still an elite quarterback in the college game. So I think they've had a complete month. They had a really underrated month in terms of beating South Carolina, Minnesota, and App State. So I would keep an eye on the Tar Heels. And they've been bonded a little bit by the whole Tez Walker situation. So, yeah, they could continue to play really well.
Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion on that Tez Walker situation with North Carolina. But anyways, this has been a lot of fun, Bill. As always, when I have you on the show to talk all things college football. But if the listeners want to check out, where can they find you?
Yeah, I'm at Bill Bender 92 at sportingnews.com. We're getting after it. We're already in week 5. This thing moves fast, but we have a lot of fun covering college football. I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Bill. I always appreciate the time, and I look forward to talking to you again sometime down the road.